She was once a legend in the courtroom, a name that made opponents tremble. Then one devastating case shattered everything. Now, Catherine Reynolds hides behind a desk at Westlake Elementary, invisible and forgotten. But when a small voice asks for help one rainy afternoon, it awakens something long buried. The little girl with sad eyes doesn't know she's speaking to the woman who once defended presidents. As Catherine reluctantly opens her heart, powerful enemies from her past resurface, determined to keep her silenced forever. In a world that had written her off, she must choose remain safely hidden or stand once more in the arena she once dominated, risking everything to protect not just a child but her own buried truth. Catherine Reynolds moved through the quiet hallways of Westlake Elementary with practiced invisibility. At 45, she had mastered the art of blending into institutional beige walls, her simple gray sweater and practical slacks, ensuring no one looked twice at the administrative assistant who kept the principal's calendar running smoothly. Her blonde hair, once styled impeccably for courtroom appearances, now hung in a simple shoulder-length cut that required minimal maintenance. The reading glasses perched on her nose completed the transformation from the formidable attorney she had once been to the unremarkable school employee she had become. Only in her deep blue eyes, if anyone bothered to look closely, could glimpses of her former self be found sharp, observant, and quietly calculating. Each morning, Catherine arrived 30 minutes before the official start of her workday, savoring the emptiness of the administrative office. She would prepare coffee for Principal Morgan, arrange his meeting notes in precise order, and check the substitute teacher rosterol before anyone else arrived. This morning ritual gave her a sense of control, a small corner of predictability in a life that had once spiraled catastrophically out of her grasp. Today, as she placed a stack of permission slips in Mr. Morgan's inbox, she paused at the small, worn photograph tucked into the corner of her desk drawer. It was the only personal item she kept at work, a faded courtroom photograph from the Chicago Tribune, showing a younger version of herself standing confidently beside Senator James Harrington after winning his landmark defense case. She had been 32 then, her expression triumphant, her hand clutching the leather briefcase her father had given her upon passing the bar exam. Catherine quickly shut the drawer when she heard footsteps approaching. "Morning, Kate," called Brenda from the front desk, her voice cheerful as always. "Could you help me sort through these donation forms for the spring fundraiser, Mr. Morgan wants them categorized by classroom." Catherine nodded, smiling politely as she extended her hand for the papers. Brenda was kind but treated her like any other administrative staff member, which was exactly what Catherine wanted. No one at Westlake Elementary knew about her past as Catherine Reynolds, ESQ, the attorney who had once represented corporate giants and political figures in high-stakes litigation. No one knew about the Harvard Law degree gathering dust in storage, or the Wall Street Journal profile that had once called her the most fearsome closer in Chicago's legal circle. Here, she was just Kate, efficient and unremarkable, exactly as she preferred. But sometimes, when the office grew quiet and the rain tapped against the windows as it did today, Catherine wondered, would anyone recognize the woman she used to be if she suddenly reappeared? Had she disappeared so completely that even she sometimes struggled to remember who she had been before that final, devastating case? The Mitchell case had been a career-defining opportunity defending a powerful pharmaceutical company against accusations that their flagship drug had fatal side effects they'd concealed from regulators. Catherine had been at the height of her powers, a named partner at Preston, Reynolds, and Shaw, with a reputation for winning the unwinnable. The case file had been delivered to her office on a Tuesday morning, hundreds of pages of technical data, internal memos, and scientific studies. Catherine had spent weeks preparing, building what she believed was an airtight defense based on the documents provided by her client. Her strategy had been masterful, her courtroom presence commanding as always. The victory had seemed assured until the 7th day of trial, when opposing counsel produced internal emails that had been deliberately withheld from Catherine's discovery materials. The emails revealed that senior executives had indeed known about the fatal side effects and had explicitly discussed concealing them to protect the drug's profitable market position. Catherine could still feel the physical shock of that moment, the sudden hollowness in her stomach, the slight tremor in her hands as she scanned the documents that proved her clients had lied directly to her face. She had asked for a recess, confronted the CEO in a conference room, and demanded an explanation. His response still echoed in her nightmares. "You're paid to win, Reynolds, not to judge. Get back in there and do your job." For the first time in her career, Catherine had walked out. Not just from the conference room, but from the courthouse entirely, leaving stunned silence in her wake. What followed was swift and merciless. The Mitchell case collapsed, resulting in the largest pharmaceutical settlement in history. Preston, Reynolds, and Shaw disintegrated under the weight of the scandal and subsequent investigations. Former clients distanced themselves, colleagues turned their backs, and the legal community that had once celebrated her now whispered about her professional breakdown. Within months, Catherine Reynolds, legal prodigy and courtroom legend, had become radioactive in the profession she'd devoted her life to. Her former partners ensured she became a cautionary tale, suggesting she'd known about the emails all along and had only abandoned the case when exposure became inevitable. The narrative they created followed her everywhere, making it impossible to rebuild in any respectable law firm. That had been 5 years ago. 5 years since she'd packed away her legal credentials and court attire. 5 years of rebuilding a life from scratch, away from the spotlight, away from the power she'd once wielded. The administrative position at Westlake Elementary had been a lifeline job that required competence but not brilliance, that valued reliability over ambition. Here, no one expected her to perform feats of legal magic or strategic genius. No one's life or fortune hung in the balance of her decisions. The smallness of her current existence had initially felt like punishment, but gradually had become a peculiar kind of sanctuary. Catherine had learned to find satisfaction in the rhythms of school life, in helping teachers coordinate field trips and assisting children who came to the office with scraped knees or forgotten lunches. But some days, like today, the weight of her former self pressed against her chest like a physical presence. On her lunch break, Catherine retreated to her car in the far corner of the parking lot, opened her glove compartment, and removed a small velvet pouch. Inside was her father's pocket watch, a family heirloom he had presented to her the day she argued her first case before the Supreme Court. Time is the only true commodity in a courtroom, he had told her. Use it wisely, and never forget who you are when you stand before the bench. The watch had stopped working years ago, frozen at 3:27, the exact moment she had walked out of the Mitchell trial. Catherine had never had it repaired, viewing the stopped mechanism as a fitting metaphor for her interrupted career. As rain streamed down her windshield, blurring the elementary school building into a watercolor smudge, Catherine allowed herself 5 minutes, just 5, to remember the person she had been. Then, with practiced discipline, she tucked the watch away, checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, and adjusted her unremarkable expression before returning to the office. Could she continue living in this half-life indefinitely, or would the person she had buried eventually demand resurrection? The afternoon brought a downpour that transformed the school pickup area into a chaotic scene of umbrellas, raincoats, and hurried goodbyes. From her window in the administrative office, Catherine watched parents collecting their children, noting with professional detachment which ones arrived precisely on time and which consistently ran late. At 4:45, 15 minutes after the official end of pickup, a single child remained seated on the bench outside the main entrance, shoulders hunched beneath a too large raincoat, small pink backpack clutched to her chest. Catherine frowned. Protocol dictated that children not collected by 4:30 be brought to the office to wait while parents were contacted. Brenda, she called to the front desk coordinator who was preparing to leave. There's still a child outside. Do you know who she is? Brenda peered through the rain-streaked window and sighed. That's Emma Parker. She's new, just transferred last week. Her mother's hospital shifts sometimes run late. She glanced at her watch with obvious impatience. Could you bring her in and wait with her? I have a dentist appointment I can't miss. Before Catherine could respond, Brenda had grabbed her purse and umbrella, calling her thanks as she hurried out the door. Catherine stood momentarily frozen, then reached for her own umbrella with a resigned sigh. This wasn't technically part of her job description, but neither was it something she could ignore. Outside, the rain had intensified, drumming against the pavement with military precision. Catherine approached the small figure on the bench, extending her umbrella to cover them both. Emma? I'm Miss Reynolds from the office. Let's get you inside where it's dry while we wait for your mother. The child looked up, revealing a small, solemn face framed by dark curls that had escaped her hood. Her eyes, large and serious, assessed Catherine with unexpected intensity. Are you going to call her again? She won't answer. She's in surgery. Catherine gestured toward the building. We'll figure it out inside. Come on now. In the empty office, Catherine settled Emma at a small table normally used for students completing makeup work. She found a box of tissues for the child's wet shoes and hair, then checked the emergency contact information in her file. Emma's mother, Dr. Sarah Parker, was indeed a trauma surgeon at Metropolitan Hospital. The secondary contact was listed as unavailable, an unusual notation that piqued Catherine's professional curiosity. The file indicated they had recently relocated from Boston, following what was vaguely described as a family situation. Catherine recognized the deliberately obscure language of custody disputes and restraining orders of familiar terrain from her previous life. "Have you had dinner, Emma?" Catherine asked, noting it was now past 5 o'clock. The girl shook her head, still clutching her backpack like a shield. "Mom leaves me sandwiches in the fridge, but they're at home." Catherine considered her options. School policy discouraged staff from transporting students in personal vehicles, but leaving a 6-year-old alone in the office while her mother performed emergency surgery seemed equally problematic. As she weighed protocols against practical necessities, Emma spoke again, her voice small but startlingly direct. "I don't have anyone to stay with. In Boston, we had Mrs. Abernathy next door, but here it's just me and Mom." She looked up at Catherine with those unsettlingly perceptive eyes. "I don't have a mama right now. Can I spend time with you, ma'am?" The question, delivered with such matter-of-fact vulnerability, struck Catherine with unexpected force. In her former life, she had excelled at maintaining professional distance from clients, from witnesses, from emotional entanglements of any kind. That distance had been a source of strength in the courtroom, but had left her isolated when her professional world collapsed. Now, this small girl with serious eyes was asking for something Catherine had spent years avoiding: genuine human connection. What would happen if she allowed herself to be seen again, even by a child who knew nothing of who she had once been? Principal Morgan's reaction the next morning was predictably bureaucratic. "You took a student to your home?" His voice carried the strained patience of an administrator contemplating potential liability. "Kate, I understand the circumstances were unusual, but there are protocols." "I made a judgment call," Catherine interrupted, her tone measured but firm in a way that momentarily surprised them both. It carried an echo of her courtroom voice. "Doctor, Parker was in emergency surgery until after midnight. The child needed supervision and dinner. I contacted the hospital to confirm the mother's whereabouts and left messages documenting my actions. Would you have preferred I call Child Protective Services?" The mention of CPS had the intended effect. Morgan rubbed his temples and sighed. "No, of course not. But next time, the school should have better contingency plans for working parents," Catherine finished, then added more softly. "Emma is a remarkably self-sufficient child, but she's still only 6. What Catherine didn't mention was how the evening had unfolded. Emma, carefully removing her shoes at Catherine's apartment door without being asked. The way she had sat quietly at the kitchen counter watching Catherine prepare a simple pasta dinner. Her precise questions about whether Catherine had children of her own or had ever wanted them. She didn't mention how, after dinner, Emma had removed a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird from her backpack and asked if Catherine would read it to her because her mother always did. And she certainly didn't mention how her voice had initially faltered when she began reading Atticus Finch's courtroom defense words she had once quoted in her own closing arguments, or how Emma had fallen asleep against her shoulder, trusting and vulnerable in a way that made Catherine's carefully constructed walls feel suddenly porous. The morning meeting with Morgan concluded with a compromise. Catherine would serve as Emma's emergency contact until more permanent arrangements could be made. It was a small adjustment to her carefully controlled existence, but as Catherine returned to her desk, she felt a strange disquiet. For 5 years, she had successfully maintained her anonymity, her unremarkable presence ensuring no one looked closely enough to recognize her. Emma Parker, with her direct gaze and incisive questions, seemed capable of seeing past carefully constructed facades. It was a skill Catherine had once wielded like a weapon in depositions. Now, on the receiving end, she found it unsettling. That afternoon, a delivery arrived at the front office, a small arrangement of daisies with a card that read simply, "Thank you for taking care of my daughter, Sarah Parker, Maryland." Catherine placed the flowers on her desk, an unexpected splash of color in her deliberately neutral space. Throughout the day, teachers commented on the cheerful arrangement, their casual curiosity about its origins prompting Catherine to offer minimal explanations. By the final bell, Catherine had mentally cataloged 14 separate inquiries about the flower-son unusual amount of attention directed her way. As she adjusted the blooms, Catherine realized she had inadvertently allowed a crack in her carefully maintained anonymity. It was a small thing, these flowers, but they connected her to Emma Parker, and Emma connected her to a life outside the beige walls of Westlake Elementary. Connections created visibility, and visibility created vulnerability. When Emma appeared at her office door at dismissal time, backpack in hand and eyes hopeful, Catherine felt an unfamiliar flutter of anticipation. Mom texted that she'll be late again. She said to ask if I could stay with you until 6. The child's direct gaze challenged Catherine to refuse. I suppose that would be acceptable, Catherine replied, maintaining her professional tone despite the strange warmth spreading through her chest. I have some work to finish here first. As Catherine completed her end-of-day tasks, Emma settled at the small table. Homework spread before her with methodical precision that reminded Catherine of her own case preparation rituals. Occasionally, the child would ask a carefully considered question about a math problem or vocabulary word, her approach to learning revealing an organized mind that Catherine couldn't help but respect. By 5:30, as they walked to Catherine's car, a tentative rhythm had established itself between them, not quite comfortable, but no longer entirely foreign. Over the following weeks, these after-school hours became a recurring feature of Catherine's carefully structured life. Emma would appear at her office door 3 or 4 afternoons each week, and they would establish temporary headquarters at Catherine's apartment until Dr. Parker finished her hospital shift. The routine evolved organically: homework at the kitchen table, simple dinners prepared together, reading sessions on Catherine's seldom-used sofa. Gradually, evidence of Emma's presence accumulated in Catherine's sterile apartment: a forgotten hair clip on the bathroom counter, a children's book left on the coffee table, a refrigerator magnet from the Museum of Science Catherine had never visited but Emma described in meticulous detail. What Catherine didn't anticipate was how these small intrusions would affect her. After years of cultivating invisibility, she found herself becoming a presence in Emma's life, helping with science projects, explaining fractions using cooking measurements, discussing the ethical implications of Scouts' experiences in Macomb County. Catherine began carrying tissues and Band-Aids in her purse, knowing Emma's tendency to approach playground equipment with more enthusiasm than caution. She found herself selecting groceries with Emma's preferences in mind and bookmarking articles about children's developmental milestones. These small adaptations occurred so gradually that Catherine barely registered them as significant changes to her carefully controlled existence. But others noticed. Teachers began approaching Catherine with questions about Emma's academic progress, assuming a relationship beyond their actual arrangement. Dr. Parker started texting Catherine directly about schedule changes rather than going through official school channels. Principal Morgan referred to their situation as our special arrangement for the Parker family, with a knowing smile that made Catherine inexplicably uncomfortable. Each interaction pushed Catherine further into visibility, cracking the protective shell of anonymity she had constructed around herself. The first significant fracture occurred during Westlake's annual Career Day. Catherine had volunteered to coordinate the event as she had for the past 3 years, arranging for parents and community members to present their professions to the students. She had deliberately scheduled herself for check-in duties, safely removed from the actual presentations. As she directed a firefighter toward the 3rd grade classroom, Emma appeared at her side, class line momentarily forgotten. "Miss Reynolds, why aren't you presenting today?" the child asked, her voice carrying in the quiet hallway. Catherine gently steered her back toward her classmates. "Because I'm coordinating, Emma. Someone needs to make sure everyone gets to the right classroom." Emma's brow furrowed in the way it did when she encountered an illogical explanation. "But you could do both. Mom's presenting in the afternoon about being a surgeon. You could present about being a lawyer." The words hung in the air between them, deafening in their simplicity. Catherine felt her carefully constructed world tilt sideways as several nearby teachers turned to look at her with sudden interest. In the 5 years she had worked at Westlake, she had never once mentioned her legal background. "Emma," Catherine said, her voice deliberately steady, "I think you've misunderstood. I'm an administrative assistant, not a lawyer." The child's expression shifted from confusion to something like disappointment. "But I saw your diploma when I went to get water last night. It was in that box under your bed. Harvard Law School." She pronounced the words with careful precision. "And there was a newspaper with your picture." It said you were the best. Catherine felt a cold wave of exposure wash over her. The box containing her credentials and press clippings had remained sealed since she'd moved into the apartment 3 years ago. Last night, searching for extra blankets for Emma, she had pulled it out but had never opened it. She hadn't realized Emma had investigated its contents while she was on the phone with Dr. Parker. "Emma, we'll discuss this later," Catherine said firmly, conscious of the interested gazes now fixed on her. "Please rejoin your class." As Emma reluctantly complied, Catherine felt the weight of curious stares from her colleagues. Brenda approached, her expression a mixture of confusion and intrigue. "Harvard Law? Kate, you never mentioned?" "It was a long time ago," Catherine interrupted, her tone closing the subject. "We should get the presentation started." Throughout the day, Catherine felt the subtle shift in how her colleagues regarded her. Questions hung unasked in their glances, speculation evident in their suddenly attentive postures when she spoke. The protective cloak of unremarkable competence she had worn for 5 years had been punctured by a child's innocent disclosure. By the time Dr. Parker arrived for her presentation on surgical careers, Catherine had retreated to her office, using budget spreadsheets as a shield against unwanted curiosity. Sarah Parker found her there after her presentation, closing the door before speaking. "Emma told me what happened. I'm sorry if she invaded your privacy." Catherine looked up, her expression carefully neutral. "Children are naturally curious. No real harm done." Dr. Parker studied her with the same direct gaze her daughter possessed. "Were you really a Harvard-educated attorney?" The question, asked without judgment or excessive curiosity, somehow demanded honesty. "Yes, in another lifetime." Dr. Parker nodded, seeming to understand the finality in Catherine's tone. "Well, for what it's worth, Emma thinks it's extremely cool that you were a lawyer. She asked if you defended innocent people like Atticus Finch." Despite herself, Catherine felt a small smile tug at her lips. "Not exactly. Corporate defense was somewhat less heroic." "I don't know," Dr. Parker replied thoughtfully. "My ex-husband is a corporate attorney. He always claimed he was protecting jobs and innovation. Of course, he also used those same skills to try to take my daughter away from me, so perhaps I'm not the most objective judge of the profession." The casual reference to her ex-husband triggered Catherine's long-dormant professional instincts. "Is that why Emma's secondary contact is listed as unavailable?" Dr. Parker's expression tightened. "David has restricted visitation pending ongoing legal matters." "It's complicated." "Legal matters usually are," Catherine replied automatically, then paused, aware she had momentarily slipped into her former professional persona. "I'm sorry, that's not my business." "Actually," Dr. Parker said, her voice deliberately casual, "I could use some advice from someone who understands the legal system, if you ever wanted to have coffee." The invitation hung between them, seemingly innocent yet loaded with potential complications. Offering legal advice, even informally, risked reconnecting Catherine to the world she had fled. Yet the thought of Dr. Parker facing legal battles without proper guidance, potentially affecting Emma's well-being, created an uncomfortable pressure in Catherine's chest. "I'm not practicing law anymore," Catherine said finally, "but I could perhaps recommend some resources." As Dr. Parker left, Catherine remained at her desk, staring at the budget spreadsheets without seeing them. The careful boundaries of her new life were eroding, the person she had been seeping through the cracks created by her connection to Emma. That evening, alone in her apartment, Catherine found herself standing before her closet, sliding aside neatly arranged sweaters to reveal the garment bag she had never unpacked. Inside hung 3 impeccably tailored suits, the armor she had once worn into legal battle. Her fingers traced the fine wool of the Navy Armani, memories surfacing of the settlements negotiated, the cross-examinations conducted, the arguments won while wearing it. For 5 years, Catherine Reynolds had hidden herself away, believing anonymity was the only protection against the pain and humiliation of her fall from professional grace. Now, a child's innocent question had exposed her carefully constructed facade. The world hadn't ended. No reporters had appeared demanding explanations for the Mitchell case. No former colleagues had emerged to renew their accusations. Just ordinary people, surprised to discover their unremarkable co-worker had once been extraordinary. As Catherine rezipped the garment bag, she wondered, which was the greater betrayal of herself, the moral compromise she had refused to make 5 years ago, or the complete surrender of her identity that had followed? The late October rain had transformed the elementary school playground into a landscape of puddles and soggy fallen leaves. From her office window, Catherine observed the children during recess, their colorful raincoats forming a vibrant contrast against the gray sky. Emma stood slightly apart from the main group, as was her habit, carefully constructing a leaf boat to sail in one of the larger puddles. Catherine had grown accustomed to watching for the child during these brief outdoor breaks, noting with quiet satisfaction that Emma had gradually begun engaging more with her classmates over the past month. The sound of the office door opening drew Catherine's attention away from the window. Principal Morgan entered, accompanied by a tall man in an expensive suit that Catherine's experienced eye immediately identified as custom-tailored Brionia power suit designed to intimidate. The man's confident posture and assessing gaze triggered an automatic response in Catherine, a straightening of her spine and slight lifting of her chin that she hadn't realized she still possessed. "Kate, this is Mr. David Harrington. He's here regarding Emma Parker," Morgan explained, his tone carrying an unusual tension. "Mr. Harrington is Emma's father. Stepfather, technically," the man corrected smoothly, his smile not reaching his eyes as he extended his hand, "though I've raised her since she was an infant. David Harrington, Harrington Associates." Catherine accepted the handshake with professional courtesy, even as alarm bells sounded in her mind. The name Harrington and Associates registered immediately, a prestigious Boston firm specializing in high-stakes divorce and custody litigation. More concerning was his presence here, given Dr. Parker's reference to restricted visitation. "How can I help you, Mr. Harrington?" Catherine asked, keeping her voice neutral despite the protective instinct suddenly flaring within her. "I understand you've been caring for Emma after school," he said, his tone casual yet somehow threatening. "I appreciate that, of course, but I've come to make more appropriate arrangements. Sarah's unpredictable schedule is precisely why I've petitioned for primary custody." Morgan shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Harrington has the necessary documentation to take Emma for the weekend. The school has verified with the family court in Massachusetts." Catherine's mind raced, assessing options with the strategic precision she had once applied to complex legal challenges. If Morgan had already verified the court documents, there was likely a legitimate visitation order in place. Direct opposition would be futile and potentially counterproductive. Instead, she nodded professionally. "Of course, I'll just need to see the documentation and make a copy for our records before I can call Emma from her classroom." As Morgan excused himself to handle a discipline issue, leaving Catherine alone with Harrington, the atmosphere in the office shifted perceptibly. Harrington's polite facade faded, replaced by cold assessment as he studied Catherine more carefully. "You know, you look familiar," he said, his tone suggesting casual conversation while his eyes remained calculating. "Have we crossed paths professionally?" Catherine maintained her administrative assistant persona with practiced ease. "I doubt it, Mr. Harrington. I've worked at Westlake for 5 years." He continued studying her, unconvinced. "Before that, perhaps, your face I never forget opposing counsel." The deliberate mention of legal roles confirmed Catherine's suspicions that he somehow sensed her background. She busied herself with the photocopier, buying time to compose her response. "I'll need to inform Dr. Parker that you're taking Emma." "That won't be necessary," Harrington replied smoothly. "The court order specifies communication through our attorneys, not direct contact." Catherine turned, meeting his gaze directly for the first time. "School policy requires us to notify the primary custodial parent when a child is released to another party." For a brief moment, something like respect flickered across Harrington's face, quickly replaced by practiced charm. "Of course. I understand protocols must be followed." As Catherine reviewed the court documents, which did indeed grant Harrington weekend visitation, she noted several concerning elements with her still sharp legal eye. The jurisdiction appeared questionable given the Parkers' recent relocation, and the timing of the order suggested it had been obtained with minimal notice to Dr. Parker. Most concerning was the provisional nature of the arrangement, pending a full custody hearing scheduled for the following month. When Emma was called to the office and saw Harrington standing there, her physical reaction was subtle but unmistakable to Catherine's observant eye, a slight stiffening of her small shoulders, the instantaneous disappearance of her usual curious expression, replaced by careful neutrality. It was a reaction Catherine recognized from witnesses preparing to navigate hostile questioning, a defensive posture adopted by those who felt unsafe but knew resistance was futile. "Hello, Emma," Harrington said, his voice softening to a paternal tone that contrasted sharply with the coldness he had displayed moments earlier. Surprise! We're going to have our weekend a bit early. Emma looked to Catherine, her eyes asking questions her voice didn't. Pieces. Catherine smiled reassuringly, though her mind was already formulating contingency plans. Emma, Mr. Harrington has permission to take you for the weekend. Would you like to get your things from your classroom? As Emma nodded and turned to leave, Catherine added casually, don't forget to take your medicine from the nurse's office and your blue sweater for the cool evenings. Emma's slight pause told Catherine she had understood the message. There was no medicine at the nurse's office, and her sweater was red, not blue. Catherine was creating a reason to follow her out of Harrington's presence. In the hallway, Catherine knelt to Emma's level, keeping her voice low and calm. Emma, is everything all right with your stepfather taking you today? The child's careful expression confirmed Catherine's concerns. Mom said he wasn't supposed to see me until the judge decided. I'm going to call your mother right away, Catherine promised. Do you have her direct number, the one that will reach her even in surgery? Emma recited the number, her voice steady despite the worry evident in her eyes. Catherine committed it to memory, then added, everything will be fine. Sometimes adults have complicated arrangements. If you need anything, remember you can always call the school. As they returned to the office, Catherine's mind shifted fully into the strategic mode that had once made her a formidable legal adversary. The court order appeared legitimate on its surface, which meant direct interference would be legally problematic. However, the procedural irregularities she had noted provided potential avenues for challenge. Dr. Parker would need immediate legal representation familiar with interstate custody jurisdiction. Watching Emma leave with Harrington, his hand firmly on her shoulder, Catherine felt something she hadn't experienced in 5 years, the fierce determination that had once driven her to work through nights preparing for crucial court battles. This wasn't about corporate interests or professional reputation. This was about a child who had somehow breached the careful walls Catherine had built around her heart. As she reached for the phone to call Dr. Parker, Catherine was already mentally cataloging the names of former colleagues who specialized in family law, assessing which ones might still take her call after all this time. For the first time since walking out of the Mitchell trial, Catherine Reynolds felt the dormant lawyer within her stirring to life. Could she remain safely hidden in her administrative role when Emma's well-being hung in the balance? The weekend passed in a blur of urgent phone calls and hastily arranged meetings. Catherine had contacted Dr. Parker immediately after Emma's departure, her carefully maintained professional boundaries dissolving in the face of the doctor's panic. He's not supposed to have unsupervised visitation, Sarah had confirmed, her voice tight with controlled fear. The Massachusetts order specifically required a court-appointed supervisor due to his history of emotional manipulation. Catherine had made a decision then, one that would irreversibly alter the careful anonymity she had constructed. I know someone who can help, she had said, hearing her voice shift into the assured tone of her former self. Meet me at this address in an hour. The address belonged to Meredith Jacobs, a former law school classmate who had once sought Catherine's help on a complex securities case. Now a partner at a respected firm specializing in family law, Meredith had been initially shocked when Catherine appeared in her office after 5 years of complete professional silence. That shock had quickly transformed into focused attention as Catherine outlined the situation, her analysis of the jurisdictional issues, and potential emergency remedies. My God, Cat, Meredith had said when she finished. You disappeared completely after the Mitchell disaster. Everyone thought you'd left the country. I left the profession, Catherine had replied simply. This isn't about me. It's about ensuring proper legal process for a child's protection. Dr. Parker had arrived shortly after, clutching a disorganized folder of legal documents and wearing scrubs beneath her coat, clearly having come directly from the hospital. Catherine had performed the introductions, then stepped back, intending to leave the legal discussion to Meredith. But as the details of the custody battle emerged, Catherine found herself automatically identifying procedural weaknesses in Harrington's filings, suggesting counter-strategies, and outlining the most efficient path to an emergency hearing. Meredith had watched her with growing amusement. For someone who left the profession, you're remarkably current on family court procedure. Catherine had faltered then, suddenly aware she had slipped fully back into her lawyer persona. I read, she'd said simply, and moved toward the door. I should go. You're in excellent hands with Meredith, Dr. Parker. But Sarah Parker had reached out, catching Catherine's arm. Please stay. I trust you. Emma trusts you. That simple statement had anchored Catherine to the conference room chair for the next 3 hours as they constructed an emergency petition challenging Harrington's jurisdiction and requesting immediate return of Emma pending a proper hearing. By Sunday evening, Meredith had secured an emergency telephonic hearing with a judge for Monday morning. Catherine had spent the night at her apartment reviewing family law statutes she hadn't considered in years, preparing arguments she would never deliver in court but needed to ensure Meredith understood. Monday morning arrived with tense anticipation. Catherine had taken a rare personal day from Westlake, explaining to Principal Morgan that she needed to handle a family matter. The irony of the excuse wasn't lost on her Emma Parker, and her mother had somehow become the closest thing to family Catherine had allowed herself in years. She sat now in Meredith's office, listening via speakerphone as the emergency hearing unfolded. Harrington had appeared with counsel, his smooth, professional voice betraying only the slightest tension as the judge questioned the procedural irregularities in obtaining the visitation order. When the judge finally ruled that Emma should be immediately returned to her mother, pending a full jurisdictional hearing, Catherine felt a wave of relief so powerful it left her momentarily lightheaded. Dr. Parker, seated beside her, grabbed her hand in a tight grip of gratitude. He'll have to bring her back today, Meredith explained after ending the call. The judge was not pleased about the jurisdictional overreach. As they waited for confirmation that Harrington had complied with the order, Catherine found herself facing an unexpected crossroads. The past 72 hours had pulled her firmly back into the legal world she had abandoned not as a corporate defender, but as an advocate for a child's well-being. The familiar rush of strategic thinking, the satisfaction of identifying procedural weaknesses, the clarity that came with focused legal analysis all had returned with surprising immediacy. Yet alongside these professional sensations came the uncomfortable awareness that her carefully constructed anonymity had been shattered. Meredith knew who she was. Through Meredith, others in the legal community would learn that Catherine Reynolds had resurfaced. What happens now? Dr. Parker asked, interrupting Catherine's thoughts. Now we prepare for the full hearing, Meredith explained. We'll need to document everything the original Massachusetts orders, Harrington,